I love bugs. I'm a scientist who studies bugs. Typically, when people hear about this, they assume that I grew up chasing bugs. Recently, a New York Times journalist asked me for my origin story. And I really wished I could tell her that I grew up chasing fireflies and collecting worms, but my childhood didn't have any of that. When I was young, 12 years old, I lost my mom to an autoimmune disease. And my young brain did what it could to numb the pain for the next few years. I went in this dark, cold place trying to deal with this trauma. And although I was going through the motions of going to school, friends, everything felt muffled and I was drifting and it felt like I was underwater interacting with everybody else. At home, my dad was dealing with his grief in his own way, being a widow, working double shifts, and we were kind of these two sad people living in this house. I distinctly remember 10th grade, 3 years later, when I'm 15, kind of waking up and, something crystallized and snapped into focus. I'm sitting in an exam and I have a blue sheet in front of me. And I could hear all the other kids working furiously, working on their sheets. And I can see clearly for the first time, and I see 3x plus 5 is equal to 0. And I remember thinking, what the heck are alphabets doing in math? This is how far checked out I had been in my days. And I failed that exam. I got a 0. And my teacher told me that I needed to get my dad's signature. So I carried this blue sheet home, this toxic kryptonite, and waited till my dad got home that night. And I put my hand on the score and I said, Abba, I need you to sign this. And he asked me to move my hand away. He looked at the score and I braced for impact. And he smiled. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is worse than physical punishment. He's doing mind games. This is psychological warfare. And he said to me, Beta, this is great news. You've hit rock bottom. There's only one way to go from here, and that's up. We're going to laminate this. And so he did, and we put my blue sheet, taped it to the wall. And for the next few days and weeks, every night after he came back from work, we'd sit together and he'd help me with my math worksheets under the glow of this neon, radioactive blue sheet. And I worked hard. I worked my butt off. Not because I loved math, because I didn't want to go back to this dark place. And I felt like I had found a little bit of a grip to just climb out of this hole that I had been. And it also felt good to have my dad on my side. 6 months later, in my 10th grade final exam, I scored a 97. And it felt so good. And I wanted to hold on to this feeling. And so I didn't want to stop climbing. And so I just continued. I got into IIT, the MITs of India. I got into Stanford. I ran marathons. I ran triathlons. I trekked in the Himalayas. Up, literally and figuratively. I wanted to be on top of the planet. Not because I was curious. Didn't want to stop climbing and didn't want to fail and go back to this dark place. Now, when I was 30, I found myself in Madagascar. We had spent the whole previous day, 10 to 12 hours on bumpy roads from the city to Rana Mofana to this beautiful, deep rainforest, the first time in my life. And we had arrived late at night. And at dawn, a chorus, a cacophony woke me. These lemurs howling at the top of their lungs. It was something between a siren and a whale song echoing through the canopy. And I walked out into the forest as the sun was glistening through the green canopy. It was nice and warm, and you could feel and smell this rich, earthy smell after a rainy day, and you could feel the fog lifting. And I saw organisms that I had never seen. These tiny gold-blue beetles that were flying with their wings like flying gold coins. A rhinoceros beetle that felt like a tiny armored tank. And moths that were the size of my palm. And I got to see some of these Malagasy kids. Madagascar is one of the poorest countries in the world. And these kids barefoot playing and chasing bugs and having a great time. And as I watched this, I realized that this is the childhood I didn't have of enjoying. And as they were collecting bugs, I had collected grief, and later on degrees and titles. And I felt something that I hadn't even realized that I had lost, this sense of wonder about the natural world. It felt as if the scales had fallen off my eyes, and I could see this beautiful forest in full technicolor. Now, although I didn't chase bugs as a child, as a scientist, I get to do it as an adult. In my lab, I study tiny springtails that launch in the blink of an eye and do aerial acrobatics and nail the landing every time like an Olympic gymnast. I study tiny spiders deep in the Amazon that make these three-dimensional webs and slingshot themselves to catch flying prey in midair. I study worms, hundreds and thousands of worms that tangle with each other and knot to form shape-shift blobs. Curiosity is kind of the spotlight that drives my scientific career. I'm 40 now, almost, and I have a 6-year-old. And the other day, he came home from kindergarten with his grade sheet in his backpack, and my wife and I opened and flipped it, and we saw that he had gotten in his kindergarten math and counting grade, he had gotten a below average grade. And so I looked at my wife and I said, well, there goes Harvard. And my dad, who lives with us in the next room, heard me, and he came stomping, and he said, Beta, go find that blue sheet. And I went and I found that blue sheet in the basement, dusted it off, and handed it to him. And he sat with a 6-year-old grandson in his lap, and he said, let me tell you a story about this scientist father of yours. Thank you.